tonight is Yud-Tes Kislev, and there'll be Farbrengens all over town. So for us together, we're going to learn something on Yud-Tes Kislev. And I've got to tell you that of all the subjects that it's possible to do, in a way, it's a crying shame that Yud-Tes Kislev Farbrengens are on the one hand so popular, and on the other hand, because there are so many people, and everyone's saying L'chaim, and everyone's singing, and that some of the deepest and most important lessons of Yud-Tes Kislev don't really get stated clearly enough. And as you can imagine, I've been to very many Farbrengens because they haven't been all on Tuesday nights. And you've had terrific people in Chabad Farbreng, in some of them, and still they don't get to the real guts of why Yud-Tes Kislev is so important. Let's understand, in the Hasidic calendar, it's the term the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus. Now, that's a very important thing, Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah means the head of the year, not the beginning of the year, and it means that the way the head directs all the organs in the body. The Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus ought to direct all the pathways to betochen and emunah and trust in Hashem, and how to live an optimistic life, and how to understand. And yet, most of the men that I've listened to Farbreng don't really make this point clearly enough. Now, I'm not criticizing them, God forbid, but I know why they don't make it clearly enough, because really you need people with quite a lot of background to be able to understand what we're going to learn together tonight. And I thought very carefully about whether I should do it, and I figured we're going to have very few people. I thought maybe Menachem and I were going to be the only two, but you guys can handle this perfectly with the background that you've got, and since you can, there's no reason that we shouldn't do this as properly as possible. And I just want to take you to the goalpost at the end, at the beginning. What this is about is the tension between suffering and happiness, and the reason for suffering. And because, when the Rebbe gave a bracha, he didn't give a bracha that you should suffer. He gave a bracha that it should be good in ruchnius and gashmius, and that the good should be revealed good, not just hidden good. And so we don't cherish suffering, God forbid. We don't think that there's a big advantage in suffering, God forbid. But if somebody is suffering, then he needs to understand why. And Yud-Tes Kislev really contains the deepest secrets of what we're talking about. Because Yud-Tes Kislev is the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus. Very quickly, everybody knows this. I'm just saying it because of the tape. We're celebrating the release of the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya and the Shulchan Aruch, his release from prison. and his release from prison at a physical level allowed him to then go ahead and teach more Hasidus. But at a spiritual level, it's common ground between everybody in the Jewish world that there was a kitrug in a Shemayim, there was a accusation in the heavens that he was teaching stuff that he shouldn't have been teaching because it was too difficult and too secret for the average person. And because of that, he was jailed, and his release we hold to be proof that kitrug was overturned, that the accusation was overturned, and that he was not only vindicated, but his release allowed him to learn much more Hasidus Barabim in public and in a much more open way than before. So that's the simple story of Yud-Tes Kislev. But at a much deeper level, I want to explain this to you, that we have a Kabbalah, we have a tradition from a man who's nicknamed the Shalah. The Shalah is Rebbe Yeshua Horovitz Halevi. He made an observation that, and all of Am Yisrael subscribe to this, you should know. It's a Kabbalistic conclusion, but everybody subscribes to it, that whatever happens in the world as we live in it, week to week, is in the weekly Sedra. And every Yontif is connected to that week's Sedra in which the Yontif is, and if you don't see it yet, you haven't learned deeply enough. So here's the tension. The tension is that Yud-Tes Kislev nearly always falls out Parshas Vayeishev. This year it falls out Parshas Vayeishev. Parshas Vayeishev shares in common the fact that it's about Yosef and Yosef HaTzadik being thrown into prison. And Yud-Tes Kislev is about the Alter Rebbe being released from prison. So obviously, it's not difficult to see that there's a correlation between those two things. What is difficult to understand is that the Alter Rebbe was released on Yud-Tes Kislev, and the Shalah says that's all you have to do is look in the weekly Sedra and you'll see it. But you look in the weekly Sedra and nobody's being released from jail. On the contrary, Yosef is being thrown into jail. So and nobody questions that the Shalah is right, or that there's anything wrong with his observation. So the question is, once you notice, let's say you're advanced enough that, let's understand, the average Joe goes to shul, listens to the story, and that's that. So you know some Hasidus, you learn that there is a Shalah which says that Yud-Tes Kislev and Parshas Vayeishev go together. Then you ask yourself the question, well, how's that possible? One is about someone being in prison, one is about someone being released. And it's the rationalization of those two apparent opposites, which are not opposites, we're going to see, that is the deepest understanding of why we're alive at all. The whole reason for your and my existence is encapsulated in this. And that's why Yud-Tes Kislev is such an incredibly important Yontif for Jews, because it is actually taking a bag of secrets that are under the table, of the deepest secrets of why you and I are alive, bringing it up on the table and opening up and saying, here, have a look. Can you make anything of it? That's up to you. But to know about it, to learn it, to understand it, that's what Yud Tes Kislev is about. So it's a really, really important day, a really important moment. It's very important to understand how the two Sedras fit together, and that's the purpose of what we're learning together. So l'chaim, l'chaim. All right. Now, why was the Alter Rebbe thrown into prison? Let's start with the Alter Rebbe, then we'll go to Yosef, then we'll come back to the Alter Rebbe, then we'll come back to Yosef. The Alter Rebbe was thrown into prison for a bewildering reason when you look back on it now. At the time it made sense, but now I'm sure, Ronan, if you're telling me that Rabbi Feldman gave a long speech about this, you'll have heard a lot of this because I was discussing it with him on Monday when I saw him, so I'm sure he went through what he went through with me. First of all, you have to understand who he was jailed by. The Alter Rebbe, arguably one of the holiest Jews that ever lived, genius Shabbat genius, was jailed on the libel of Frum Yidden. It wasn't Russian peasants, it wasn't Cossacks, it was deeply religious Gedolei Yisrael, deeply religious, learned rabbis who denounced him to the government and encouraged the government to imprison him. That was the problem. So you have to ask yourself, how's that possible? We believe in Ahavas Yisrael. We believe you're not allowed to tell on another Jew to the government. That's called meisering. You're not allowed to do that. How can these religious people have done that? So the answer is, I'm sure Rabbi Feldman went through this. The answer is that these people were deeply religious Jews who were frightened of what the Alter Rebbe's teaching would do to Judaism. That's what they were frightened of. So they were lishma. They meant well. They meant the best possible thing for Am Yisrael. They believed in Am Yisrael. And you have to understand the history of it. That just before this, there was a man called Shabsai Tzvi, who was a fraud, who ultimately geschmatted and brought religious Judaism into extraordinary disrepute. He was followed by a man called Frank, who was much worse. Frank, I'm going to explain what his position was in a second, but what he did, well, I'll explain it now. Let's take a detour. What was the problem? What was the religious philosophical problem? 3 lines of it's 3 lines of pure Kabbalah, and by the Arizal. And the 3 lines of Kabbalah basically say this. They say that before creation, there's nothing but God. There's only godliness. So how can God make something that appears to be separate from God? Only by what's called the Tzimtzum Rishon, the first contraction. And it goes on to say that so Hashem contracted himself, as it were, to make an empty space. And into that empty space, he poured creation, or he lit creation. Right? And that's called the first Tzimtzum Rishon. And there's a question. Don't let me lose you here, because this is really critical to you understanding where we're going in a minute. The question was that, everybody accepted that. Everybody accepted that's Arizal, that's that's Kabbalah, that goes where, that everybody accepted it. What was the problem? They asked the question of whether that Tzimtzum was kipshutoi or not kipshutoi. Was it literal or not literal? If it was literal, you have to say that Hashem wasn't in the space that he shrank from. If you say that it's not literal, if you say that it is literal, yes, he can't be there. If you say it's not literal, then what are we talking about? So the literal said he's not there. How do we know he's not there? Because you're telling me that he goes into the toilet with you when you defecate. Holy God is going to be in the toilet with you when you defecate and you use your toilet paper and there's a question of whether you wash your hands or you don't wash your hands. God goes with you into the toilet. Who are you to take God into a toilet? God is above a toilet. So they argued, kipshutoi, that it was literal, that there are certain things where Hashem doesn't go. He's holy. Sure, he made it, he created it, but it's not for him. And it's not for you to make it for him. That was the view of the Misnagdim. The view of the Baal Shem Tov, who is two rivers above the Alter Rebbe, and whose Torah the Alter Rebbe explained in a way that everybody can understand it. He said, it's not kipshuto, it's not literal. Why isn't it literal? Because ein oed milvadoi. We all know this. There's no place devoid of him. If there's no place devoid of him, how can you say that he's contracted himself and there's a vacant space where there's no God so that he can make creation? So we learn, the Baal Shem Tov Shita is carried on by the Alter Rebbe, we learn that it is that what was withdrawn was only his light, not his essence. So Oyer Ein Sof is removed, his light, his revelation was removed, and from that moment on, what does it mean his revelation was removed? We don't see God. We don't talk to God and get an answer. I mean, you should talk to God. You should daven to God and talk to him, and we had this year last week. But we don't see him. We see a table. We don't see God emanating into a table.
So it could be similar to when we go to sleep, the Shema goes up, only the nefesh is left.
Okay. Yeah, hold that thought. So what we're talking, very good, we're talking about light being denied, not essence being denied. When you go to sleep, you don't die. The lights go out. Your consciousness is different. So that was the Chabad, that was the Alter Rebbe's answer to this. And the deeper level of that answer is that we need to go to that Mokum Ponoi, to the vacuum, where God's presence isn't there, and that is the world. And we need to take the world and physicality and work with it and elevate it. Whole different thing. So we need to go to the toilet, go to the bathroom. We do take God with us into the bathroom, but how we behave in the bathroom is critical to the whole business of living. When they heard that, they talked about Shabsai Tzvi, and then worse, Frank. Because what did Frank do? Frank said, Dira b'tachtoinim, we have to make a dwelling place in the worst possible place. So I'm going to go into evil, and because I want to elevate it. So what he did is Frank had orgies, open orgies. Why? Because he wanted to elevate the orgies. And when the real Chachamim, the real Talmidei Chachamim, heard this, they said, I'm sorry, this has got nothing to do with Yiddishkeit. And when the Alter Rebbe was teaching the secrets of Dira B'Taktoinim, they thought that this is the same, it's an echo of the same thing. And because of that, they didn't want to have anything to do with it. To the point that the Gaon of Vilna, called the Gra, refused to meet with the Alter Rebbe, on his mother's instructions, by the way. The Alter Rebbe tried to meet with him. Various people tried to set up meetings with him. The Gra was considered the greatest living Poisek in Halakha, and they wanted him to meet the greatest living Poisek in Kabbalah. And he refused to do it because he was frightened that if he met the Alter Rebbe with his reputation of Kedusha and holiness and intellect, he'd be seduced into this cult. That's what they thought it was, a cult, where it's going to end up that people are going to have Roman orgies. So they denounced him, and he was thrown into prison. Now, in that regard, it's very similar to this week's Parsha, because let's talk about this week's Parsha with Yosef. Yosef, I need to take a detour. You know, much of our lives is spent in war. Much of our lives is spent in war. There's a war against Yetzer Hara. Davening is a war. It's a war of concentration and not concentration. The temptation for pleasure is often a bad pathway. That's why people have made mistakes and said that they have to remove pleasure from their lives altogether and go and sit on mountains naked and roll in the snow and whatever else they do, beat themselves up, and because a lot of our life is war, if one at one level or another. So in this Sikha, by the way, I'm supposed to mention the Sikha, this is from volume 25 of Likutei Sikhas, the one on Vayeishev. So in the Sikha, the Rebbe explains that there are 3 levels to war. And he's not talking about international wars, I suppose he is as well, but he's talking about the wars you and I fight. And the first level is where there is a honest fight, one with the other. And what's the problem with a fight? Everybody gets injured. A person comes to the door and kicks the door in and says, I'm going to take your children. And he's, God forbid, and he's covered in feces, God forbid. And so you have to fight him, right? And if you fight him, you get the feces on you. You can't fight him and not get the feces on you. Does that mean you don't fight him because I don't want this feces on me? You can't let him take your children. So you've got to fight him. But there's a negative to it. The second level and there's a very big disadvantage with that kind of war. The loser isn't your friend. You haven't achieved anything other than dominion, domination. Because the moment he gets strong enough, he's going to be back at you. We see this in countless situations. We see it with the Arabs in Israel over and over and over again. So, second level of war is where you become so strong that they don't dare start up with you. There's no issue of friendship. There's no issue of tolerance. They're just too scared. So you have an American army, and you have some startup who would take the United States to war if they're stupid enough, right? Australia at the moment is stupid enough, unbelievably. But so that's the second level of war, where the, the, the fight is so one-sided that the other side doesn't dare start up. But the third level, and this is the level of all the Maimorim of Potiphar Shalom Nafshi, which means my soul was redeemed in peace, means that you engage with the enemy in a way where you convert the hatred into love. That you change an enemy into a friend. Is that difficult to do? Very. But then you have real peace, you have real shalom. Why? Because there isn't anything to fight about anymore. In case number one, the loser is going to want to come and fight you. In case number two, you're only safe while your army is that strong and the other army doesn't catch up. Because when the other army catches up, Israel was so strong for so long, nobody could even imagine that October 7 could happen. And then the guard gets let down and they bring up their own resources and you see what happens. But the ultimate thing is where two enemies find common ground in enough that they become friends, and then if that friendship is real, there's no war anymore. There's no fight anymore.
That's America and Japan.
Huh?
America and Japan.
America and Japan, excellent example. Absolutely. So these two. So let's go through the story with Yosef. Yosef HaTzadik. Now you have to understand. Listen to this because it's really personal. We have the Avos, the forefathers, Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, and then we have Yosef HaTzadik. I want to ask you, do you understand what sort of lives these people led? We're talking about the holiest Jews that ever lived, right? The forefathers of our destiny. You would think that they were rich, had plenty of servants, like the kings in the fairy tales, in the story, like the czars, like the sort of lives they lived. Avraham Avinu was tested 10 times. He was to the point that when he was told, when he misunderstood that he should shecht his son, he was ready to do it. Who wants a life like that? He's promised by God that his son's going to be the father of Am Yisrael, and he's suddenly told to shecht him, and he complies. He's ready to do it. Who wants 10 tests like that, and the 9 other tests? And he's told that if he doesn't do that test, the all other 9 tests are worthless. And then he has a son, Yitzhak, and Yitzhak has 2 children, Esav and Yaakov. One of them's evil, bad, gives nothing but heartbreak and trouble to his father. And then we have Yaakov. Yaakov's life, take Yaakov's life. 22 years he had to live with Lavan, being raped and pillaged and cheated against and lied to, and go back earlier. First of all, he has to run away from his home, from his father, who he adored, from his mother, who he adored. He had to run away from them because his brother wants to kill him. And so then he goes to Lavan. He's cheated and ruined, and every day another test. And then finally he escapes. And what happens to him? He has a son, his favorite son. They bring him a story that he's been killed. And he's in mourning for another 20 years. What sort of life? You understand that it's a tough life. And then let's go to Yosef. Yosef is Yosef HaTzadik. He is above the 3 Avos. He's the jewel in the crown of Am Yisrael. And let's talk about his life. 9 years of age, his mother dies. Would you like to have your mother die, God forbid, at 9 years of age? At 17 years of age, He has 11 brothers who want to kill him. And when they don't kill him, they throw him in a pit. And when they throw him in, after throwing him in a pit, they sell him into slavery. And the Midianites sell him to Potiphar, where he finally gets a break. And he becomes the boss of Potiphar's house. What happens? One of the 5 most beautiful women in the history of the universe throws herself at him every day for 5 years. You know, you need the Midrash to know this. It doesn't say it in the Chumash. 5 years, every day, she wanted to sleep with him. And every day for 5 years, he refused. And it's not clear, by the way, that he has to refuse. Why? Because it would be adultery if she was Jewish. But she wasn't Jewish. So she's not subject to the laws of Vayeishev. So theoretically, he probably could have slept with her, except that it was being disloyal to his master. But there's no halakha that he has to be loyal to the master. But because it was inappropriate, he didn't do it. So what happens to him for that? What's his presence? He gets thrown into an Egyptian jail. An Egyptian jail where his life was disease, torture, death. That's what nobody got out of. They didn't have colour television and their own computers like we do. And if the food isn't to their liking, they have a revolt. And everybody says, oh, it's terrible. It's really terrible. You know, the conditions that they suffer under. That these 5 gang kids of 20 can go and kill somebody and escape the death penalty. Instead, you pay. I bet you don't know how much it costs to keep a person in jail every year. I'm telling you as a lawyer, what?
200,000
on the knocker, $200,000 each a year. They live quite good lives. They're fed, they're exercised, they have plenty of spare time, they don't have to work. That's not what an Egyptian jail was. Egyptian jail was torture, disease, death. That's where he's thrown in. Now I want to ask you something. Do any of these people, Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Yosef, say, where's God? There is no God. I don't believe in God. If there was a God, it wouldn't happen to me. You don't see one word of complaint from any of them. Why not? Why don't you see one word of complaint from any of them? And this is a big key to this whole issue that we're discussing. That nowhere do you see them turn around to God and say, why me? What are you doing it to me? Why am I so lucky? You know, in that thing Rabbi Lida was saying today, that in that musical he says, you know, we're the chosen people. Why choose us, God? Choose somebody else, you know. There's no word of complaint against Hashem by any of the Avos or Yosef, and they had more difficult lives than you and me. And Baruch Hashem, I'm not speaking for anybody else. But everyone has their nisyonos, everyone has their challenges, and you can either face those challenges and grow with them, as we're going to come to in a minute, as we've done many times in the Shir before, or you can fold and collapse and become depressed and lose heart and lose incentive. And for those people that don't lose heart and don't lose incentive, like the Avos, we're going to come to this in a minute, but I'm just going to say it as part of the goalpost, and we'll keep it on the shelf until we get to it. It's really because they have such a strong belief in their God and such a strong belief that he can't be doing anything bad. And anything that's happening to you that seems to be bad, you need to work on yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that if something's happening bad to B, you can go to B and give him a lecture on philosophy. You got to put your arm around him. You got to help him. You got to put your hand in your pocket if he needs it. You got to help him. But when it happens to you yourself, the whole real big secret of what we're learning about Yud Tes Kislev, you'll see in a minute, is that the question that you have of your God is not, why are you doing this to me? Why am I the object of something bad? On the contrary, you go to work to find out why you have been given the opportunity to work through this and elevate it into Kedusha, into holiness, thus becoming a hero. That's the definition of a hero for a Jew. Not any of the popular ideas of a hero, but that you, with your tests and with your nisyonos, which are not my tests, they're not your tests, each person's got their own scorecard, their own life, and their own cocktail of challenges. And we learn this over and over again, but the opportunity to work with those and elevate those is the biggest bracha that a Jew can have. Okay, Yosef HaTzadik. He goes into prison, but he stays there. In Parshat Vayeishev, he stays there. In Yud Tes, when we celebrate Yud Tes Kislev, we're celebrating that the Alter Rebbe left. So, what is the common ground between that the Shalach can say that the Yud Tes Kislev Yontif in Chassidus parallels Parshas Vayeishev, where it doesn't, because the tzaddik in each case has a completely different result. So the answer to that is that they don't have a different result. They have the same result. When the Alter Rebbe was sent to prison, I'm going to tell you something which you may be uncomfortable with, particularly people on the tape, maybe you less, but it's big stuff, but you got to know it. A tzaddik gomer, a complete tzaddik, a rebbe, has to give permission before anything negative happens to him. He's in charge of his destiny. He can make a miracle. How do we know? We have countless situations. For example, with the Alter Rebbe, let's stay with the Alter Rebbe for a moment. When the Alter Rebbe was accused of this libel by Gedolei Yisrael, and on his way to prison, Shabbos was coming in, and he said to the coachman, "Please stop. I don't travel on Shabbos." Coachman says, "What are you talking about? You're a prisoner. Who are you telling? You're telling us what we do with you? We tell you what you do." But he was so holy and so obviously holy that it made an impression on them. They were a bit anxious, but they laughed. So he broke the axle. You know the story. He broke the axle. The axle broke, and they had to spend a whole lot of time fixing it. But they got it fixed in time. I can't remember the details. It broke again, and the Alter Rebbe said, "Sorry, I don't travel on Shabbos." And they were absolutely gobsmacked. You know, there's a whole lot of this is published because it was diarized by the prison staff. When he was in prison, there were so many miracles that the staff witnessed. For example, he davened, the room was dark and no light in it. And he davened chakras at the right. How did he know when to daven chakras? one of the guards was a religious goy, a religious Christian, and he came to him and he says, in the Old Testament it says, when Adam ate from the Priyat Sadas, Hashem comes to him in Gan Eden and says, Ayecha, where are you? So he asked the Alter Rebbe, doesn't God know where he is? How can you believe this? What's your interpretation of it? So the Alter Rebbe said to him kindly and with a holy face, he said to him that when you reach an age of whatever it is, and he named the age of the interrogator, of the guard, the exact age. So when you reach that age, the time has come for you to consider where you are in life, where you are on your own personal journey, from the time you're born to the time you die. Where are you in your journey for good? For what have you contributed to other people and to the world? This guy was absolutely knocked out by this answer. And there were many, many things like that the Alter Rebbe showed that he was an extraordinary person, to the point that when he was finally released, he got a thing from the Tsar. I forget what some sort of like a paper saying that he was a very honourable person and he could always do whatever he wanted, and the Alter Rebbe used that to help Jews who were in difficulty. He got this special award, some special certificate, I've forgotten what it's called. So he could have, with all these miracles, not gone to jail. Just like he stopped the thing going for Shabbos, he could have said, I'm not going to jail. So if he did go to jail, it's a very difficult thing to understand, but you and I have to understand that if he didn't go to jail, it must have been because he saw a value in it. And what the value in it is the secret to your and my life. And that's what we're celebrating on Yud-Tes Kislev. What he saw was that there was a kitrug min hashamayim, as I explained at the beginning, and there needed to be a court case, and there needed to be a psak, and that psak needed to be on earth, and therefore he consented to be the vehicle for that to happen. Now let's go to Yosef Hatzadik for a moment. Yosef's thrown into this Egyptian jail. The only way out of that is disease and death. And in this week's Parsha, I'm going to quote you a piece of Chumash, which is mind-bending. Right? There's a butler and a baker. You know that these are the two guys, and they had dreams, and Yosef interpreted the dreams for Paro. Before that happened, we have a pasuk that says this, that he saw the butler and the baker, and he said, Madua Pneichem Roim Hayoim.
Why you sad?
Huh?
Why you sad?
Why are you so sad? And the Rebbe goes mad with this, in this Fabrengen. He says there not one question, there are two questions. The first question is on Yosef. Right? Yosef lost his mother at 9, imprisoned by his brothers, wanted to kill him at 18, sold into slavery, refused to sleep with Potiphar's wife. She libels him. He gets thrown into jail, and he's in jail, and he doesn't say to God, where's the justice? What's the good of me being a good man? Here's where I end up. This is what happens to tzaddikim. I should have slept with her and at least enjoyed myself. What am I doing here? Does he ask that question? Does he feel sorry for himself? Is he thinking about himself? He's not thinking about it. The question is, Madua Panechem Royim Hayoim, to the butler and the baker. He's saying, what are your faces so upset about? He's looking at their faces, not his. Not his. That's the first question, the Rebbe. And then the Rebbe asks the second question. He says, the first question is on Yosef, but the second question is on the butler and the baker. What does he expect? What does Yosef expect? They're in a jail where they're going to be diseased and die. What does he expect them to be at a Fabringen? Saying L'chaim, having some cake and herring. They're in the worst position. So what do you expect of their faces? And the Rebbe explains that it's the same answer as the Alter Rebbe going into jail voluntarily. Not voluntarily as anybody would understand it, but voluntarily as Kabbalah explains it, that he has actually got a hold over that energy, that spiritual energy. But with Yosef, first of all, the question on him is very clear. He has no problem with his God. He has no problem with what happens to him. He has absolute betoken that there is a God who's creating the world. By Ashkoka Pratis, he's bringing everything into creation, every moment, every eyelash, every hair, every and therefore he's controlling it. And if he's controlling it, the question is only, is he controlling it for good or bad? Can't be for bad, therefore it's for good. If it's for good, then this is happening to me for a reason, for my benefit. So he's got no problem. So he doesn't say to God, why did you do this to me? Put me in jail. I should have slept with her. That doesn't exist. Now the harder question is on the butler and the baker. What Yosef HaTzadik is saying, how can you be unhappy? You don't see what I'm explaining to you. If there's a God and he's an Ashkoka Pratis and everything's for good, why are you so unhappy? It must be, you're in jail, it must be that you have an opportunity for personal greatness. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. But it's a completely different perspective, it's a completely different point of view. And yet it's the same point of view, because it's the Alter Rebbe wanting to go through this psak for a happy result, and Yosef HaTzadik saying, I don't know what the result is yet, but it's going to be for good. And it was. He ultimately did interpreted the dreams. He ultimately became the second most powerful man in Mitzrayim. He ultimately was the cause of Am Yisrael leaving Mitzrayim with enormous wealth and starting the whole process of world Jewry. So, far from being a contradiction, and I'm not suggesting this is easy to understand, but far from it being a contradiction, you're really seeing the same thing being replayed in two different melodies. One melody is the melody of the Alter Rebbe, who obviously didn't want to go to prison, didn't want to leave his wife and children, didn't want to have the risk of having to eat non-kosher, didn't want the risk of pain and suffering. Who wants that? Nobody wants that. When the Rebbe gave us brachas, he didn't say, I'll give you a bracha for pain and suffering, God forbid. He gave us a bracha for good, revealed good and overt and revealed good. That's the best translation. But the Alter Rebbe understood that the good that he would be able to build with the energy of building Dira B'Taktoinim, we'll come back to that in a moment, was so strong that it was worth the whole process, and that the result of that process was going to be good. And it was, because what happened when he was released, what the Alter Rebbe's early Maimorim were called Vortlach. They were very pithy, short, very deep, saying that you needed a lot of learning to be able to understand. The big Hiddish that the Alter Rebbe was aiming at, and this is what the Gedolei Yisrael was so frightened of, was that he wanted to bring the stuff that we learn here on Tuesday night to every common Jew, to every ordinary Jew who didn't have training in Gemara and didn't have training in how to give a pilpul. That's a very difficult thing. You need to be a Talmud Chacham for that. That's not what that's not what the Baal Shem Tov was teaching, and that's not what the Alter Rebbe took and structured and organized into lessons that ordinary people can understand. And that process of doing that was why, because he saw the value in the taktoin, in the lowest piece of the world. The nature in the world is such genius. It's such incredible, purposefully done. Forget about these idiots who talk about this millions of years and accidents, and it's all so magnificently complicated that it's begging, and our job is to take that magnificent tapestry and make it kodesh, to make it a dwelling place for Hashem in this world. So for that, the suffering, although very regrettable, there's no question that it's regrettable, and we have to daven to take it away, and we have to give each other a bracha that we don't suffer it, but it is purposeful. And for the Alter Rebbe, he saw that when he came out of jail, if he got the green light to go ahead with this, in other words, that the kitrug was overturned, if the accusation was overturned, now he could go and teach Chassidus in its entirety to everybody, and that's exactly what he did. He wrote Torah Oyer and all the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, which then were converted slowly one by one by all the Rebbes of Chabad, with deeper explanations. Not that they weren't deep in the first place, but made those explanations available to everybody, so that you and I are learning stuff. I mean, we're all very spoiled. You've got to know this. You and I are learning stuff together, which if you went into the street and met a Jew who has a neshama, who's a holy, he has a Helik Elokam Imal, he's a part of God, and he's never heard any of this, he has no idea what we're talking about. Right? And it's kind of not fair. And that's what the Alter Rebbe was on about, that it's not fair. That's what, and when the Alter Rebbe had his experience with, there were various Rebbeim, various versions of this story and various ways of it, but when the Baal Shem Tov went up to Shemayim in Mincha, he used to travel to Shemayim in Mincha. I don't understand what that means. He met the Mashiach, and he asked him, "When will you come? We're waiting already 2,000 years. When are you coming?" And the Mashiach answered him that when the well springs of Chassidus are spent out everywhere, so that everybody understands this stuff, we'll have a Dira B'Taktoim. I'll be there. Naturally, I'll be there, because everybody else will understand this stuff. So when the Alter Rebbe was worried whether or not he could explain this, he went to jail and he said, "Come on, I'm ready to endure the court case, and we'll see." And when he won, do you think he took revenge on these Gedolei Yisrael? Has v'shalom. He instructed all his Hasidim that they shouldn't in any way behave negatively to these people. On the contrary, he has told them that they have to love those Jews because they meant well for Yidden. That's what, and preached Ahavas Yisrael to them. Now, it's the same game with Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef HaTzadik is thrown into prison, also has a release from prison. Mind you, with him it takes another couple of sedras. It takes two and a half more sedras, and then he comes out and he had this whole thing with his brothers, and he settles them in Goshen, and all has a happy ending, and he is the force and the energy for Yetzias Mitzrayim. What does that mean, Yetzias Mitzrayim? You have all learned, we've learned together, that Rebbe's Torah, that Yetzias Mitzrayim is that you and I have the capacity to break out of our limitations, that we don't have any limitations. Limitations of Mitzrayim. We have Yetzias Mitzrayim. There's nothing we can't do. Nothing stands in the way of Ratzon. That's what the Rebbe used to scream over and over again. Nothing stands in the way of Ratzon. You see a difficulty, it's only Mitzrayim. Break out of it. And Yosef HaTzadik taught us how to do that. So you get two energies which sound as though they're not the same, but of course they are exactly the same. They're exactly the same, saying this to you and me. We have a lifetime. It's a very limited time, and it's urgent. And what are we doing in that lifetime? We are the main game is to build a Dira B'Taktonim, to build a dwelling place for Hashem on earth at the lowest possible level. And our job is to do that and to introduce into that lowest possible level godliness. So that the Tzimtzum Arishan, let's go back to the Tzimtzum Arishan. Why they were wrong that they said it was Kipshutoi meant that there were certain areas of lowly life, everyday life, putting out the garbage. Last week I used the example of buying 4 tires for the price of 3 and spending all day on it and being busy, and it's an obvious necessary thing, but all of that is a focus on the wrong thing. That's a focus on just Gashmias. There's no such thing as just Gashmias. We are engaging in Gashmias in order to elevate it, in order to make a Dira B'Taktonim. And making the Dira B'Taktonim is our total tafkid, our total purpose. And when we're in tune with that purpose, now you have a real life. And that's what the Alter Rebbe wanted. He wanted every Jew to have a real life. Not just standing around waiting 60, 70, 80 years waiting to die. What's the good of that? Okay, so you eat some good meals. You know what happens to a meal? You excrete it. What permanent value does the meal have for you? So, do we have to eat? Of course we have to eat. But you have to eat with a perspective that that's only to give you energy to do something more important. What's the more important? Live with your God, take the physicality that you come in contact with and elevate it to make it Dira B'Taktonim. And Yud Tes Kislev, it's momentously important to understand that why Chabad values Yud Tes Kislev so much is that we are focused on the fact that the Alter Rebbe needed divine, not needed divine permission. He needed to show that he had divine permission to give you and me the tools to live at a different level of energy altogether. And that's what he did. And so it's a huge yontif for us. It's very, very important. And what I've been talking to you guys about, first of all, you're all the people who are here, it's a skinny crowd because of your desk Kislev, but everybody here is experienced enough to be able to handle all of this. But you've got to know that if you sit in a Fabringen with 50, 60, 70 people, half chica, and yapping and wasting half of the time with loud, unnecessary stupidity, they can't get this. You can't get this. You have to be sober to get this. You know? So l'chaim, guys.
Good.